Hello and welcome to The Exchange. I'm Bruce Sellery. The nation has spoken and it has voted for change. Stephen Harper is out. Justin Trudeau is in with a stunning Liberal majority. He triumphed on promises to fix and grow the economy. The question is, will he deliver on them? Among his top pledges, running a $10 billion deficit to kickstart the economy. BMO calls that by far the most important thrust of the Liberal platform. Trudeau wants to run that deficit for 3 years to pump $60 billion into infrastructure over the next decade. TD estimates the stimulus could boost growth in 2016 and 2017 by 0.1 and 0.3 percentage points respectively. Trudeau also campaigned on a tax break for the middle class and a hike for the wealthy. Those making between $45,000 and $89,000 annually will see their rate cut 2 percentage points to 20%. Those making more than $200,000 will see their rate jump from 29 to 33%. Now, it's unclear what last night's result means for Canadian investors. Japanese bank Nomura told clients before the election that the most positive outcome would be a Liberal minority government, as it's the most likely to yield a stable government. Well, the Liberals did much more than that. Also, Bloomberg looked at stock returns from 1922 to today under different governments. It found they were 3 times higher under Liberal prime ministers than under Conservative leaders. The outlook isn't so positive for oil and gas stocks. Investment bank Canaccord Genuity said in a report a non-conservative government would likely be a negative for energy equities, given the Liberal policies on the environment, regulatory oversight, and pipelines. Here's how the market reacted today. The TSX rose about 80 points. The Canadian dollar closed above 77 cents. Now, how Trudeau and this country are perceived on the world stage could depend on 2 agendas, the environment and trade. This December, he'll join global leaders in Paris for a summit on climate change. He'll have until then to come up with a national strategy to slash emissions. And then there's the massive Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. It was reached about 2 weeks ago between Canada and 11 other countries. It still has to be ratified, though. Trudeau was somewhat critical of it, calling it a deal based on backroom negotiations. Still, he did say this.
We are a pro-trade party. We understand how important trade is to invest in our businesses, to make them more competitive, to create good jobs for Canadians, to grow our economy. We are committed to giving a full airing of the Trans-Pacific Partnership in Parliament as part of what a responsible government does.
It's time now for the big picture. Goldy Hyder is president and CEO of Hill & Knowlton Strategies. Armine Yalnizyan is senior economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Goldy, I want to begin with you. What is the #1 takeaway for business?
First of all, my advice is don't panic. I think there's a general reaction of like, oh my God, what are we all going to do? Look, this is the hand the business community has been dealt. A majority Liberal government in British Columbia, a majority NDP government in Alberta, a majority Liberal government in Ontario, and a majority Liberal government in Quebec, and now a very strong, stable, national majority Liberal government. This is the landscape. You have to adjust to it. And I think that my advice to the business community is know your priorities. If it is about the TPP, if it is about infrastructure, if it's about access to markets, you're going to have to convince stakeholders and the premiers and the mayors to get on board and to take them to Ottawa with you so that you can get this new government to do what you need it to do. It's early days. I suspect that the difference between an election and governing is quite wide in terms of what they promised and what they're actually going to be able to do.
Armine, #1 for you.
The #1 takeaway for me is what the markets did, which is the dollar's up and the stock market's up. So obviously the business community thinks this is a good deal. This is not going to be a rock the boat type of package. And it's true what Goldy's saying is the proof's in the pudding on what gets done on both the environment and on trade. As you mentioned, Bruce, in your introduction, we'll see the text of the Trans-Pacific Partnership in about 30 days. The side deals are still being negotiated. There is an opportunity for this government to put their mark on it, but it's hard to tell what can happen, whether they've been, whether they're the snake that has to swallow the pig whole, because that's what was delivered to them, or whether there's some room for them to negotiate deals that are favorable. The platform as a whole is fairly progressive. Most of the measures that we have heard about in the TPP would impinge on their ability to come through with some of those things. So they're going to have to decide whether they're pro-trade or pro-progressive platform, and the pudding will needs to be baked.
What happens when you get there, of course, is you see that you're suddenly running a $1.9 trillion economy, and you have to make decisions about how to advance the interests of the country and the people in it. I think this is an opportunity from a Nixon to China moment, if you will, particularly around the issues we're talking about heading into Paris in December. You're talking about environment. You're talking about the commitments that the parties have talked about with respect to our processes in Canada. You know, it's one thing to say that in a campaign, but it's another thing to actually arrive here and say, what exactly were you planning on doing with the National Energy Board, for example? What are your mechanisms in terms of reviewing the things that are there? Be careful what you say, because those are the kinds of things that actually move markets if you give the wrong signal.
One of the other big promises, in fact, the biggest promise, was Liberal government will run a deficit to invest in infrastructure. Armine, how quickly will that stimulus come on board? Because it could be, as we mentioned, a real boost to the economy at a cost.
Well, there's three areas that they're talking about. One is public transit. There's a lot of public transit that's waiting to go. So that money should, relatively speaking, be ready to roll out. The other area is social infrastructure. So affordable housing, childcare. These are things, again, that there is a pent-up demand for, and they can actually make a difference in fairly short order. The question will be, how quickly can the markets absorb this money? And the third, which is more challenging in a longer term, actually steering the economy type of approach of infrastructure, is green infrastructure, and how they move it towards a more environmentally sustainable platform for both generating and distributing energy. And I think that's the game that they could make their mark on.
Goldy, I want to talk to you about the West. I lived in Calgary for 5 years. Trudeau is a last name that still can bring up venom at a dinner party here. How does Justin Trudeau make amends, build relationships in Alberta?
Well, I think he's come a long way. He's certainly done better than his father did, that's for sure. I mean, you look at what happened in Calgary last night. They took 2 seats. They came extremely close to winning a third in what was a very close race. So I think he's made those inroads already. He has done a lot of things before. I was struck by some time ago when he took a very pro-foreign investment stance. I think that goes over well in the industry. I think he's going to try and find ways to differentiate himself in terms of the trade policies. But speaking specifically of infrastructure, if I can, I think that's an opportunity where they need to take a big picture view of this. Only fitting that I say that on this panel. But last time around, we had a lot of these shovel-ready projects. You got 2 years, spend the money. We spent the money. We've actually paid off the deficit that we created by spending it, and yet we're stalled. So I would hope that the government steps back and looks at what do we really need to do, first of all, and secondly, what are the rules by which we will engage with business? Because I think there's a lot of P3 opportunities here. We've done a few P3s in the country, but we really need to do more and really stimulate the economy, which includes the business that has long-term investment potential than just government influx of cash.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I'm sure you've got clients lining up out of your door looking for ways of making this P3 money move. It can't move. It isn't moving. It's been sitting there unused because there aren't enough
but it should be
private
moving.
sector.
That's the point.
But there aren't enough private sector partners. So really what the Trudeau government is saying is this is the best time to borrow money to actually get things done. Let's not wait for private sector partners, and let's not be held hostage to the 30-year contracts that they bring.
You know what concerns me about that, Bruce, though, is this is also when we're going to find out just how different this government is, right? Because we know when you start dishing out government money, you suddenly get into scandal territory, you get out into pork barreling. I'm hoping that the promise of the government to be different is actually shown in actions as well.
Armine, Paris and the climate conference is very, very close at hand. What will the Liberals need to do? Who will they need to rally within the business community in order to have a confident first step forward there?
Okay, Bruce, I approach this a little bit differently than Goldy. You will be very surprised to hear, which is that what Trudeau is going to do and should have been done 10 years ago is work with the provinces to talk about what are the goals. What are the public goals, the common good goals for greenhouse gas emissions that we want to move ourselves towards, set those targets, make them very clear, and then let the private sector do what they need to do. It is not about micromanaging. It's about setting targets that we believe we can meet as a society.
Goldy, we're going to talk later in the show about the latest growth out of China. What's Trudeau's job number one on attracting foreign investment? Where does it come from, and how hard a fight is that going to be?
Well, look, he did take a very clear position in the CNOC-Nexen deal. He came out in front of the government's decision itself to say that he supported that investment. Subsequent to that, of course, the government made its policy around announcements around state-owned enterprise investment. I'll be interested to see, what does he say about foreign investment generally? When is his first trip to China? How welcoming will he be of investment that's coming from countries where state-owned enterprises operate, including in places like Norway and other countries? So I'm watching for that signal because, let's be honest, we need an influx of capital in this country to create that stimulus so that governments don't always have to do it.
We are very close to the end of our time here, but one of the most important cabinet positions Trudeau will need to fill is finance. Let's start a pool. Goldy, who would you say should get that job?
Well, as a conservative, I'll take the easy pick. I think Ralph Goodale, just because he's been there, done that, and would be a safe choice at a time in which there's a lot of new people in that caucus.
Armine?
I think the likely choice is going to be Scott Bryson because he also has got a lot of experience and he's younger and he's a blue Liberal. But I think they've got a very deep well from which to pool. I agree about Ralph Goodale. I think John McCallum has got plenty of experience. And there's two newbies, Duclos and Freeland. And Morneau, right. So there's actually they've got a deep pool to pull from, and I'm ready for any surprises.
Well, thank you for being ready for the surprise that was last night. We appreciate it, Goldy and Armine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.